This is HOKUMEI, and welcome to my channel. In this series, I will show you how did Chinese people become able to type Chinese, and how did they make it to 300 words per minute. It all started 150 years ago, when China was under the reign of Qing dynasty. Due to a silly policy implemented by the aristocrats, which had closed up the country to the world for centuries, the Great Qing, as a huge empire, had been isolated from the world for hundreds of years, which left Qing perceiving that Qing was the most powerful country in the world, and all the others were just barbarians. Thus, Qing missed the opportunity of the First Industrial Revolution, and its political system was still the typical rotten, corrupted, and inefficient feudalism. The Qing emperor commanded the English ambassadors to kowtow to him when they came to visit Qing. They refused, and the emperor felt greatly offended. Thus, because of the diplomatic disputes and the Qing's ban on the import of opium, which greatly damaged the benefits of the British Empire, the Opium Wars broke out. The Opium Wars kicked off over a century of humiliation for China. Due to the huge technological gap, Qing was defeated easily almost every time. The country's strength dwindled, corruption was everywhere, and everyone from officials to common folks was hooked on opium, neglecting their duties. Meanwhile, the aristocrats were busy partying like there was no tomorrow and turned a deaf ear to official duties. Western powers forced China to sign a bunch of unfair treaties, making them pay up, give up land, open ports, and import goods, leaving the people in misery. Eventually, a group of determined intellectuals decided that it was enough. They overthrew the Qing dynasty and established the Republic of China. However, even though the Qing Empire had fallen, the new republic hadn't turned China into a powerful nation like Japan. China's development remained sluggish. Many landlords and nobles who held power before the revolution still held power after it, only with different titles. Some Chinese people even thought that president is just like an emperor and they should kowtow to him, believing they could never repay the emperor's kindness in their lifetime. They still saw themselves as the greatest empire, rather than a republic. In this situation, the intellectuals of the time believed that China's traditional culture was one of the biggest reasons for the nation's ignorance and inability to adapt to the new republican system. So, in a bid to save the country, they launched the New Culture Revolutionary movement. During this movement, the ideas of democracy and republicanism spread in China. However, this also led to a complete rejection of traditional culture, with Chinese characters being the first to take the hit. For example, Communist Chen Duxiu, one of the founder of CCP, stated, "Chinese characters are not only difficult to convey new ideas and principles, but they are also a den of corrupt and poisonous thoughts, so abolishing them is nothing to regret." Cai Yuanpei, the president of Peking University, suggested, "Since Chinese characters must be reformed, we might as well directly adopt the Latin alphabet." Lu Xun, a famous writer of the time, remarked, "Square characters are a tool used by the ruling class to keep the people ignorant," and even issued the dire warning before his death, "If Chinese characters do not perish, China will perish." Opposition to Chinese characters wasn't just about traditional culture poisoning minds. It was also about the need for productivity and cultural promotion. In English-speaking countries, typing on a typewriter only requires 26 letters and a few punctuation marks. But for Chinese, that's a Herculean task. Can you imagine that until computers came along, Chinese people were using these typewriters to write articles, news, and etc.? What a trial for your eyes and fingers. So, the intellectuals came up with various schemes to represent Chinese characters using the Latin alphabet. Thus began the half-century-long Latinization of Chinese characters. And they even gave this Latinized version of Chinese characters a fancy name, the new character. In fact, even after computers arrived in China, the sheer number of Chinese characters and their unique formats kept them out of the digital world. After the founding of the People's Republic of China, the push for Latinized Chinese characters didn't stop. In the 1950s, even Mao Zedong said, Our written language must be reformed, and it should move in the direction of a common phonetic system shared by world languages. From 1956 to 1958, the Chinese government revised and approved the Hanyu Pinyin scheme, officially bringing Pinyin onto the historical stage. Initially, the ultimate goal of Pinyin was to replace Chinese characters as the new script. However, at first, Pinyin was just a tool for phonetic annotation, much like the transcription symbols in English. Not only Latinization, but Chinese characters also took another path: simplification. The current standard for simplified characters in China comes from the complete list of simplified characters published by the government in 1964 and its subsequent versions. As you can see, by simplifying certain components of the characters, they indeed look easier to write now. Not as easy as ABC, though. The practice proved that this was a relatively reasonable scheme for the simplification of Chinese characters, which till today is still adopted by mainland China, Singapore, and Malaysia. And Taiwan still kept and keeps to use traditional characters. Then came the Proletarian Cultural Revolution, a 10-year chaos and disaster due to ultra-left ideology. In fact, even before the revolution, many people who opposed the Latinization of Chinese characters were labeled as rightists, persecuted, sent to labor camps, and even killed. During the Cultural Revolution, this issue only got worse. Meanwhile, in the same period, the Character Reform Committee proposed the second scheme for simplifying Chinese characters in 1977 and introduced the second round of simplified characters. These are some of the second round of simplified characters. As you can see, they seem even simpler than before, but because the common sense during the Cultural Revolution was that intellectuals are apart from the broad masses of workers and peasants and were not a part of the people. So no expert was consulted when specifying the second round simplified characters, so the simplification of these characters lacked scientific basis and was eventually abolished shortly after the Cultural Revolution. Back to the main topic, our beloved Pinyin. After the 10-year catastrophe of the Cultural Revolution, Chinese people began to reflect on why such a disaster happened. The craze for Latinized Chinese characters finally started to wane. Under Deng Xiaoping's leadership, China embarked on reform and opening up. They gradually turned from planned economy to market, and the economy took off. Meanwhile, the problem of Chinese characters being difficult to display on computer systems was solved by a computer scientist named Wang Xian by using a bunch of functions to define characters, kinda like vector graphics. So, here's the problem. We've solved the display issue, but what about input? Remember, Chinese people use the QWERTY keyboard, not some Ching-Chong keyboard. How do you quickly and accurately identify a Chinese character with a shortcode? A guy named Wang Yongmin came up with the solution: the WPM input method. In WPM, Chinese characters are broken down into many components, with each key corresponding to several components. You have to memorize which key corresponds to which components to use WPM properly. There's even a famous mnemonic for these components. WPM was so popular after the reform and opening up that even my parents can recite parts of this mnemonic. Later, other input methods similar to WPM, which are based on the shapes of Chinese characters, emerged, and they are collectively known as shape-based input methods. Although the memorization process is tough, once you've got it down, WPM is a breeze. In the WPM input method, almost every character can be represented by 4 or fewer Latin letters. The core method is breaking down the character. You need to split a Chinese character into several components and then input the keys corresponding to these components in sequence. For example, the character "nip," which means you, can be broken down into 3 components, which correspond to WQI. If you add a Y at the end, it indicates that the character has a left-right structure, but you can skip this if you want. If a character has more than 3 components, you only need to type the letters corresponding to the first, second, third, and last components. Isn't it clear? Wait a minute, what happened to Pinyin? Weren't we just talking about Pinyin? Since you have QWERTY keyboards, why don't you use Pinyin input? Why use the WPM input method, which is so hard to remember and has such a high learning curve? Are you guys dumb or something? Actually, it wasn't that there were no pinyin input methods back then. The problem was homophones. Homophones mean that when you type the pronunciation of the character you want, a bunch of characters pop up in the candidate list. You then have to page through using the plus or minus keys on your keyboard and select the character you want with the number keys. In Chinese, words are usually made up of 2 characters, and homophones for words are fewer. But even if you input by words, these pinyin input methods are still not satisfactory. First, due to hardware limitations, it took forever for the system to find the word after you finished typing. Second, more often than not, the word you wanted wasn't even in the input method's dictionary. And when you typed TI, A, and MEN, the system didn't know if you meant TI, A, nan, men, or TI, and men, or Tiananmen. In contrast, since each character almost corresponds to a unique code in Wubi, the system's response was super fast. Skilled Wubi users could even type 150, 200, and even more characters per minute, which left the pinyin input method a total loser. But do you think the story ends here? Nope. Although Wubi once became the mainstream input method, as time went on, even better input methods emerged. Jining ABC, which means Smart ABC, a household name in China. This new generation of intelligent pinyin input method became popular due to hardware and algorithm upgrades. Compared to earlier pinyin input methods, Smart ABC was easier and more user-friendly. Although it couldn't match the typing speed of Wubi, pinyin was taught in textbooks, making it more intuitive and almost cost-free to learn for the masses. However, the real kicker was that Smart ABC was built into the Windows system, so people had no choice but to use it. It latched onto Windows like a koala to a tree, becoming the most widely used input method in mainland China. From Smart ABC onwards, pinyin input methods kept improving and adding features, making pinyin the go-to choice for more and more people. Of course, the real game changer for pinyin input methods didn't come until 2006 with the arrival of Sugu input method. It totally killed the game. Why, you ask? Because Sugu was the first to combine search engine technology with input methods. Imagine this. With traditional pinyin input methods, when you wanted to type a trending news term, you'd have to painstakingly input each character one by one, and then select the right one from a pop-up box. What a nightmare. But Sugu input method could connect to the internet and fetch the most searched terms from the search engine, predicting what you wanted to type. You'd never have to worry about missing a word again because Sugu turned the entire internet into your personal dictionary. How powerful is this technology? Well, in 2007, Google's Pinyin Input Method Editor tool used data from Sugu input method, and Google made an apology saying, "We are willing to face up to our mistake and offer an apology to users and to the Sohu company." By the way, Sohu was the company who owned Sugu. I have to say, this is absolutely hilarious. But personally, I still really love Gboard. Don't get me wrong. So, this time, will Sugu win? Will Sugu bring 300 words per minute to Chinese people? That's in the next part to be revealed. Thanks for watching part 1 of my video. This is HOKUMEI, and I set up this channel actually for my language learning. This is my first video, so please forgive my imperfect English grammar and any inaccuracies. Through my channel, I hope to help more people understand the real China. After all, it's easy to hate a country, and it's easy to love a country, but truly understanding a country is the most challenging. Thank you for watching. Be sure to check out part 2 coming soon. Hit the bell icon to get notified as soon as it's up. See you next time.